We are going to start a new series next week. And I was supposed to do a series. We had something on the books for months now, and I was supposed to do it, but like usual, I mix things up and I change stuff. And so we're going to do something else, which is completely irrelevant because if I didn't tell you anything, you would never know the difference. But I just want you to be in on the secret. So we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're doing something else, and you're going to love it. But next week, we're starting a series, and so I wanted to kind of do a prequel of it today, if you will, kind of an introduction. I want to lay the groundwork, the foundation on the series we're starting this week. And the series is called Slaying Giants. Slaying Giants. And I'm super excited about this. I think it's going to be awesome. And show of hands, how many of you are facing a giant right now in your life? Put your hands up. All right. A lot of you are less honest than I thought, but either you're facing a giant right now, or you just faced a giant. You're about to face a giant at some point. You know somebody who's facing a giant. The point is, there are all kinds of giants in our life, and we're going to talk about several of them. Start next week. We're going to dive right in. But I want to lay like I said, the groundwork today, kind of get the party started. And so, if you will indulge me, I'll give the introduction so that we can just jump right in next week, and it'll be very, very exciting. We're going to tackle several different giants that each of us might face in our lives. You ready? Yeah. Say, oh yeah. Say, I'm ready. Let's do this. You keep losing people as you keep saying, right? People's like, just get on with it already. I just see how far I can go. I'm just testing the waters, all right? So make sure you're awake and you preach back at me because I like it. Turn in your Bibles to the book of Numbers. Book of Numbers. That's the book that if you start reading in Genesis on January 1st, this is the book you give up in. All right? If you make it past Leviticus, you're just going, oh man, I just got to make it. No, and then you hit Numbers, you're like, no, I'm done. I'm just going to go to Psalms or something because this is crazy. Numbers, don't give up on Numbers because there's some exciting stuff happening there, and God is doing a lot of stuff. We're going to start there. There's a story that I want to share with you, and it's a story that many of you know, have heard a million times. We've preached it before out of this passage, and it's the story of Moses when he sends out the spies into the promised land. Remember the story? So God has promised the children of Israel the promised land, Canaan, to Abraham and his descendants because of Abraham's obedience, God's favor on him. He says, I promise I will give you the land of Canaan for you, your descendants, forever. It is yours. It is your inheritance. I'm giving it to you. It is for the people of Israel from here to the end of time. That was God's promise to Israel. It is theirs, the promised land. So Moses, you know the story, you watch the movie, broke his people out of Egypt. They're walking through the desert. They get to the edge of this promised land. And what Moses does is he says, God has told me to send some spies into this land. I want you guys to go in, one from each tribe, go in there and tell me what you see, write everything down. I want to know a detailed report of what the land looks like, what it smells like, who lives there, what grows there. Are there cities? Are they fortified? Do they have walls? Do they live in shacks? What's the situation there? I want a full report so that we can better prepare to go into the land that God has promised us and has already given us. And so the spies go and they do their thing and they come back. And there's where I want to pick up the story. In chapter 13, the book of Numbers. And let's start reading in verse 26. It says this, Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told them and said, We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Now, just to point out real quick, when we say milk and honey, growing up in church, I heard this term a lot, and I had the craziest ideas about this. And still to this day, my mind goes back to what I imagined when I was a kid. You guys ever seen Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory? When they go into the chocolate room and everything you see is edible. Was that not the most amazing place? Like, I dreamed of living there, right? It was incredible. They had the chocolate and you know, the little gluttonous kid fell in it. And it was awesome. The chocolate was just falling. And so when I heard this as a kid growing up, that's kind of what I pictured in my head, like a Willy Wonka world flowing with milk and honey, which I guess if you're lactose intolerant diabetic doesn't, you know, do you very well, but got to watch other people enjoy it. But that's kind of what I pictured in my head. But I just want to clarify real quick. Land flowing with milk and honey is metaphoric. What does it mean by when there's milk, flowing milk? It means there's cows, there's goats, sheep, right? There's cattle, livestock. That's where there's milk. And when there's livestock, there is what? There is grasslands for them to feed. When there's grasslands, it means that what? The ground is fertile. The soil is rich. When that happens, it means there's water that feeds it. It means there's people who take care of it. So it all goes and goes. And it's flowing milk and honey. That means there's lots of cattle, lots of rich soil, lots of pastures, lots of great, rich, fertile land. And honey the same way. Honey, you have to get honey from what? From bees. Bees get it from the pollen, from the flowers, and so on and so forth. And they have bee farmers, or what they call farmers? I don't know. But they get the honey. And anyway, what he's saying is, when he says a land flowing with milk and honey, is this is a land of extreme abundance. It is a rich land. That's what it means when he says it's flowing milk and honey. And here is the fruit. We brought you some samples of what is growing over there. And in the passage before this, we read that they snagged off of a grapevine just one thing of grapes. What is it? What is a bunch? Is it a bunch of grapes? Is that what it's called? Okay, a bunch of grapes. And it was so big that they had to carry it on a pole between two men. So I imagine these grapes the size of basketballs. These guys are carrying them. It's like, this land is abundant and rich and overflowing. Look at some of the stuff we brought. This is the fruit. They bought pomegranates and figs and all kinds of stuff. And they laid it there and said, this is just a sample of what is over there in our land, our promised land. And this is the fruit. Nevertheless, the people, verse 28, who dwell in this land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwelt in the land of the south. The Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites, all the otherites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell in the sea and by the banks of the Jordan. All of a sudden, Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. It's like before you guys get too carried away describing what's wrong and what kind of opposition, let me just tell you that we need to go ahead and go and take it. Because we can take it. We can overcome it. We are well able to do this. We've got this. We can overcome this. Let's go. Verse 31 says, but the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against these people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. It's a little severe. Now, obviously, it's completely made up. There's nowhere in the whole passage with you read these spies going around and checking stuff out. Not once was that mentioned. These guys are starting to make stuff up to shine a bad light on this new land that they want to get into. This is a land that devours its inhabitants. And not only that, all of the people whom we saw are men of great stature. There we saw giants. He said there were some giants over there. The descendants of Anak came from the giants. And we were like grasshoppers. Well, in our own sight. And so we were in their sight. These people were so big. They were giants. We were like little grasshoppers. At least we saw it that way. We felt like little grasshoppers, and we're sure they saw us that way too. We don't stand a chance, these guys said. This promised land, this land that God has promised, man, there's no way we can get in there. There's giants there. How are we supposed to go and take this land when it's full of giants? That's crazy. Caleb says, no, we got this. Let's go, let's take it. Let's take possession. We can do this. It's interesting that the land that God gave, past tense, Israel, as their own, as their possession, is filled with giants. You know, isn't it funny how anytime God promises something, we always assume that it's going to be easier? You done that? You feel that way? Like, for some reason, subconsciously maybe even, we feel that, we react as though, well, if God promised it, if God's going to open the doors, then it'll be easier. Like, we wait for a sign from God, we pray for wisdom, and we say, God, open the door, show me what you want me to do, show me where you want me to go, and we assume that it's the easy way, don't we? We assume that God's will, or God's promise, is the path of least resistance. We do. Well, God can't be in that, because surely, that's harder. That's more complicated. God, show me the right way. Well, this is easy. Well, that must be God. Thank you, God, for paving the road. Why do we do that? This is a land of abundance. The land that God promised his people, gave it to him. It's a rich land. And it's filled with giants. I think if we look back on any time that God opened doors or God revealed a promise to us or made a promise to us, we would notice very quickly that any time there is a promise of God, a promised land, it's always inhabited by giants, isn't it? In order to claim the promise that God has laid out before us, we have to face some giants. The promised land is always inhabited by giants. Be careful in proclaiming that something is the promised land if no one is living there. Chances are, if no one's living there, the land isn't worth very much. You with me? The promised land will always have giants on it. You're always going to look up and face some giants if you're going to claim the promises of God in your life. There will be giants. Turn to your neighbor and say, there'll be giants. Yo ho ho. God has already given this land to Israel. We see it before in verse 1 of this same passage. God reminds Moses that this is the land that I have given you. This is yours. And it makes reference to Abraham back in Genesis 17 when God says to Abraham, he says, the whole land of Canaan where you reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you. And I will be their God. I will give you as an everlasting possession. In perpetuity, we say. Forever. That means it doesn't matter what happens on that land will always belong to you. It's yours. It's yours. All you got to do is go claim it. Just go kick out the giants and take the land. It's your land. There's just some giants living on it. And when these guys come back and give their report, they're like, wait, I know that this is the promised land or whatever. God gave it. It's our land, but there's giants there. We can't face giants. No one said anything. Okay, if you would have told me that before we left Egypt, hey, come on to the promised land, we got to kick out some giants, and I'd been like, nah, I'm good. Not leaving Egypt to go face giants. You know what said anything about giants? There's giants in the way. So what happened was, the people as a whole, they listened to the majority of the spies that said, we can't do this. It's too much. It's too hard. They're too big. They're too many. We can't fight these giants. So the people of Israel decide, as if it's optional, not to take the promised land. They said, no, the report is it's too hard, they're too many, they're too strong, and they're too big. We're not going to do it. And God unleashes his wrath on the people. It's interesting why we always assume there's not going to be giants in the way. When life, let alone God, always teaches us that anything that is worth doing is going to cost something. Anything that's worth doing is worth fighting for. Anything that is worth doing is going to be difficult. And any promised land that God has given you is going to have giants on it. Don't assume that because God has promised you something or opened the doors for you, that it's going to be easy. Why? Because your enemy knows where God is taking you. Because he's following along. And anytime your enemy sees the path that God is leading for you, he's going to put giants in the way to keep you from entering into the promise that God has for you. So there'll be giants, and they'll be big. But God keeps his promises. God keeps his promises. When God makes a promise, he does not break it. Ever. God keeps his promises. So you better get ready to fight for what's yours. If you want to take the promised land, claim God's promises for your life, you need to understand there's going to be giants there. And you better be ready, because I'll tell you this right now. If you're not ready to slay a few giants, then you will never, ever, ever get to see the promised land. And evidently that's what happened to Israel. That was God's punishment. He says, you know what? Every single person and all of the children of Israel right now that are alive that decided not to go in there, except for Caleb and Joshua, not a single one of them will set foot in that land. The land that I gave them, the land that I promised them, not a single one. You're going to wander the desert. You're going to walk around for 40 years until all of that generation has died off. And only Caleb and Joshua will be able to set foot in there. If you're not willing to slay some giants, you won't be able to get in the promised land. You'll never see it unless you're willing to step up to some giants and take care of business. Caleb says, let's go at once and take possession. We can do this. We can do this. The thing is, it's not just anybody that can be a giant slayer. And we see that in this passage. It's usually the chosen few. There's just a few people. Not everybody can be a giant slayer. It takes a certain set of skills to be a giant slayer. And it takes a certain set of skills to get you disqualified from being a giant slayer. For instance, if you were a wimp, you can forget being a giant slayer. If you're a pansy, it's kind of like a wimp, I guess. Same category. You're never going to be a giant slayer. If you're a complainer, forget it. There's no giant slaying complainers. If you're an excuse giver, not going to be a giant slayer. If you're a procrastinator, probably not going to be a giant slayer. I can kill this giant tomorrow. If you're a doubter, chances are you're never going to slay a giant. So not everybody, not anybody can be a giant slayer. Most people, actually, will never be a giant slayer. The majority of people are not willing to step up and face a giant. Even when what hangs in the balance is a promise of God. The majority of people, even Christians, will say, nah, I'd rather not. You believe that? Now, we would never say that about ourselves. We would never express that out loud. We would never feel or think that way. But many times, when confronted by the giants that are in our way and keeping us from stepping into what God has for us, we decide to take another way. Because our reaction is always looking for the path of least resistance. And we try to convince ourselves that can't be from God. Man, there's something in the way there. There's a giant in the way. It can't be from God. Surely God doesn't want me to face a giant. Well, I hate to tell you, but if you read the Bible, there's a lot of giants in there. And a lot of little guys that had to step up and face a giant. Literal and figurative. And I would venture to say that maybe what's keeping you from stepping into the promised land that God has for you is that you've been putting off slaying a giant. If you want to see the promised land, you've got to be willing to slay the giant. It's your giant. I don't know. We're going to talk about several of them in the upcoming weeks. Shameless plug. You got to be here. You don't want to miss it. Later on, after all this happens and God is starting to open up his wrath on the people of Israel, and move over to chapter 14. And I want to show you how Joshua and Caleb react when they hear that the people of Israel have decided not to go into the land. Chapter 14, let's read verse 6. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes. I mean, it could have been a symbol of just anger, frustration, or all of the above. And they said to the entire Israelite assembly, they said, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of this land. I love this line. Because we will devour them. The protection is gone. But the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. We will devour them, says Joshua and Caleb. They don't stand a chance. Now that's some serious nerve. Two guys standing against 2 million. Think of the perspective here. The entire people of Israel. And two guys. You against your country. Your country's like, nah, we're good. And you and your bro are like, we got this. Let's do it. Not just anybody can see the promised land. Very few, as a matter of fact. Sad reality. Very few will eventually see and step into the promises that God has given them. Because very few are willing to step up and fight and slay the giant. It's sad, isn't it? That the majority of people, the majority of Christians in their lifetime will never experience the fullness and abundance of the blessing of God on their life because they're not willing to face the giants. They're not willing to slay the giant, and they will never see the promised land. They will never see what could have been. They will never get to see what God could have done with them and through them and for them in their lifetime because they were not willing to slay the giant. But Joshua and Caleb were. It takes a few things to enter the promised land. 3 things I want to give you. Qualifications, if you will. Characteristics of someone who will see the promised land. Number 1, the person who has courage. Courage to stand when no one else is standing. Courage to get up and stand for what you know is right, even if you are alone. It takes courage to see the promised land. Second, it takes conviction. It takes conviction to see the promised land. Conviction in what God says. You have to believe that what God says is truth. And you have to believe that what God promised, He will keep. You have to have conviction. Conviction is deep-rooted. It's unwavering. It means you stand and you fall by it. It means you live and you die by it. It is your moral compass. It's what you direct yourself by, what you set your life direction by. It's your conviction. Your conviction must be set on what God says, not the bad report of other people. So it takes courage to stand. It takes conviction in what God says. And the third thing, it takes confidence. Confidence in who God is. Confidence in who God is. You hear these 2 spies talking, Caleb and Joshua, and you hear a level of confidence that is almost absurd. Think of the situation, like I just mentioned. It's 2 guys against 2 million, first of all. Secondly, what they're suggesting is that they go and they storm fortified cities occupied by enormous people who will be bent on slaughtering them. 2 guys. That's some serious confidence right there. Confidence or stupidity. Sometimes they might look indistinguishable to other people. Until you factor in God's promise. Confidence in who God is. You have to know beyond the shadow of a doubt who has called you and who you belong to and who you represent and who is leading you into that land. Confidence. Confidence. And this confidence, encouraging conviction gave them a perspective that no one else in Israel had at that moment. It gave them a point of view, a way of seeing things that no one else saw at that moment. Our church is about to step into a proverbial promised land. And I don't mean the building. The building is a tool. The building just facilitates what God is going to do. When I say promised land, what I mean is the thousands of people that will be given their lives to Christ in this building. the people who will be getting baptized, the thousands of families and their kids who will be transformed through this church, the thousands of marriages that will be rescued and pulled back from the brink because of this church, and a city that will be turned upside down because of the unconditional outpouring of love that comes out of this place. That's the promised land. That's the promise. I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt, God has given us this city. We're for Miami. That's the promise. 1,620,000. Remember the number? 1,620,000 people who do not attend a church on a regular basis in this county. That's the promise. And let me tell you something right now. That promise comes with some serious giants. Whew. That promised land is riddled with giants. And you better believe that if we intend on stepping into that promised land, we better be ready to slay some giants. And we better hope we have the courage, the conviction, and the confidence that it takes to see the promised land. But you got to be willing to face the giants. I would like to say that we're ready. I would love to say, like, yeah, let's do it. And we storm out this door and we just go. I mean, well, I'm going to face the giant with a toothpick if I have to. Just give me a spitball. I don't care. I will take this guy with my, whatever. I would like to say that. That's how I feel. But are you ready for this? Are we ready for this, New Dawn? Are we ready to slay these giants and claim this promised land? It's about time we find out. Because if we're not willing to face some giants, we'll never see the promised land. How about you? I'm ready to go to battle. I'm ready to step into it. I'll take on any giant. I'll take on the New York giant. I don't care. Any giant. Jolly Green giant. I don't care. I'll fight a giant. Let's fight some giants. You ready? There's a promise, but there's also giants. Can't have one without the other. I want to leave you with 3 practical things, and then we'll go home. 3 things that will help us prepare to face these giants. You ready? Like I said, this is the introduction to what's coming in the next few weeks. You don't want to miss it. And so this, practically speaking, will lay the groundwork, the foundation, and then we'll hit the ground running next week with another one. I'll be speaking next week again, and then Pastor will be back and he'll finish up the series. But it's going to be fun. It's going to be awesome. And so I want to leave you with these 3 things that will help prepare us to face these giants. You ready? Say yeah. Got your pen? 2 people are taking notes. Number 1, the fruit is worth the fight. The fruit is worth the fight. When Caleb and Joshua came before and the spies, they laid the fruit that they had gathered in front of the people and said, look, this right here, this 18-pound grape that a whole family can live off of, it's just a sample of what's over there waiting for us. It's just a taste. It's just an hors d'oeuvre to the main dish. What's over there is endless. It's so much more, so much bigger. Look at this fruit. It's worth fighting for. What's over there is worth fighting for. We've been in this blessed project for over 9 years. Which, let me just say something. Can I, if you allow me, can I just tell you, churches don't survive this type of thing normally. I know you don't know that because you're rare. And if you knew all the other stories, what's happening here is special. It's unique, and it has not happened anywhere else. And when you get into a building project and you can't necessarily finish, or for whatever reason, you keep going, churches die from this. I want to tell you that. And I'm here to tell you that we are not dead. And we're still here. And you're still here. And you're faithful. And that's unique. And that's crazy. And that's audacious. And I would venture to say that people like that are willing to face a giant or two. 9 years can't hold us back. Shoot, what giant's going to keep me from that promised land? Throughout these 9 years, God has given us little samples of what it looks like, of just a taste of what is to come. You guys remember years and years ago when we did our first Fall Fest? We didn't really know what was going to happen. We set up a bunch of booths and some bounce houses and stuff. A lot of you were there. You volunteered. And we said, well, let's see what we could do. And no promo, no nothing. We just set up. We're like, I don't know, whatever. And people started coming in. And people started coming in. And more people started coming in. And more people started coming in. And we're going, what is that? This is crazy. You remember that? We didn't know where the people were coming from. They were just coming in. Do you remember when we did the egg drop for Easter? 40,000 hours stuffing little eggs with candy in here. Some of your fingers still hurt from that. And the next year we got wise and we bought the eggs already stuffed. Praise Jesus. 15,000 eggs, is that what it was? Something crazy. And that day we didn't know what was going to happen. We did promotion, we did what we could, and then we hoped for the best. But that fear of always, is anybody even going to show up? And people started coming. And they kept coming. And they kept coming and coming from all over. Over 1,000 people flooded onto our parking lot that day. And we got a glimpse of what God could do. Do you remember that? I remember looking at some of the volunteers' faces and they were going, I didn't think this was possible. Oh yeah, but that was just a taste. There's way more on the other side. There's way more in that land. Do you remember the Sunday we did spontaneous baptisms? And that morning when we started the service, I immediately regretted it, going, that was a crazy study we were done. Who in their right mind is going to be like, yeah, I'm going to get baptized. I didn't bring anything. I'm just going to go dunk. And then the invitation came. Pastor said, right now is your moment. Who's going to step up and identify with Jesus and go get baptized? And we're like, and someone says, I will. And then another, and then another. It's powerful. It's just a taste. It's just a taste. And in a church that should be dead because of what we've been through with this dumb building, week in and week out, people give their lives to Christ. Almost every week, did you know? Almost every week, someone accepts Christ. That's crazy. It's just a taste. It's just a taste. Just a sample of what's possible, of what God is capable of what He has promised us if we're willing to slay some giants. I'm willing. I'm not missing out on this. The fruit is worth the fight. It's worth it. It's worth it. Number 2, The second thing you need to know to prepare to face the giant is giant is a relative term. You need to understand this. Giant is a relative term. The only reason you call something or someone a giant, it's because it's way bigger than you are, or it's way bigger than what you have put it next to. So in comparison, this is a giant, right? And it's relative. Because what seems gigantic right now may not be gigantic. What happens when you bring something in way bigger than what you thought was a giant? Well, the giant ceases to be a giant, doesn't it? Once a giant, not always a giant. There's always a bigger giant. And a giant is only a giant when you compare it to something that's way smaller. But when you bring something that's way bigger, your giant ceases to be a giant. I remember when I was little, in 5 or 6, there was this missionary in Argentina. And I remember thinking, this guy is a monster. He was huge. He had huge hands. I mean, they were massive hands. And just big, he had a huge, I don't know how to say it politely, he had a big head, he had a big noggin. Red hair. And he was just a big man. And I remember thinking, he's a giant. This man is a giant. Well, wouldn't you know, after some time, several years went by without seeing him, I saw him again when he was still a giant. But then some more years passed, and I saw him again. And I grew up a little bit, and all of a sudden, you know that feeling you get like, you're not as big as I thought I remember you, right? If you've ever moved out of the house you grew up in, and then you visit it years later, you're going, hey, I remember this a whole lot bigger, right? It didn't seem like so tiny when I was growing up here. Because giant is a relative term. And whatever you're calling a giant right now, it's only because you are holding it to something much smaller. It's only because you're comparing yourself to it. But the second you invite God into the room and you put your giant next to your God, guess what? What happens? Your giant ceases to be a giant. It's all a matter of perspective. You can't change your circumstances. You can't change what happens, but you can always change your perspective. And when you get to thinking that this giant, this situation, this illness, this problem, this relationship, this bankruptcy, this loss of a job, this whatever it is, this giant is bigger than me. I can't face it. It's more than I can handle. It's time to step back and get some perspective and let God stand up next to it. And every time that giant that you were so adamant could not be defeated, all of a sudden ceases to be a giant. Next to God, there's no such thing as giants. Perspective. It's all perspective. Remember what the spies said? And it seemed to, in our eyes, they were giants in our own eyes. You know, the way we saw them huge. Caleb and Joshua did not share that perspective. When 2 million other people said, nah, they're too big, Caleb and Joshua said, what are you talking about? You have the wrong perspective. You have the wrong frame of mind. You have stopped seeing this situation for what it really is. You see, you didn't factor in that the one who called us, the one who sent us, the one who leads us, the one who promised us, and the one who gives this to us is the God of the universe. And compared to Him, these guys are nothing. There is no such thing as giant when God is in the room. It's a matter of perspective. Change your perspective. Tell your neighbor, you got to change your perspective. Number 3, how we can prepare to enter the promised land is you need to understand the truth. And what is the truth? We will absolutely overcome. We will overcome. Caleb said it when he spoke to the people. When he was given his report, he says, we can take this. Let's go right now, take possession, because we are absolutely able to overcome it. We will overcome these giants. You will overcome your giants. We will overcome. Can you say that with me? Are you up to it? Will you say that with me? Do you believe it? Say it with me. We will. I don't believe you. Say it again, Sandra. Come on. Somebody preach. We will over. Yes, absolutely. We will overcome. Because the only other option is death, never having entered the promised land. There is no happy medium. There is no, I'll take the least difficult road. There is no, we'll camp right here on the edge so at least we can look into the promised land. There is no, God, can you open up another path because this one is a little crazy. There is all in or nothing at all. Either we face and slay the giants and we overcome, or we die, never entering the promised land. So, we will overcome. And some of you need to adopt that as a mantra with your own giant in your own life. Because you wake up every day defeated. You wake up every day with a perspective of this is big, this is it. I can't handle this and I can't do it. I lose every day. You may not say that. That's how you live. That's how you react. That's how you approach your daily life. And you need to just speak truth to your giant. I'll overcome this. I'm going to take you down. I'm going to jump up on the ring, and I'm going to throw myself around, do a double somersault flip, land into a pile driver right into the mat. Andre the Giant is going down. I just dated myself severely. He was a wrestler in 87, 80s. Never mind, whatever. Google him. He's huge. Jeez. Work with me here. Well, you know who Andre the Giant is. I don't know anything about wrestling. Pro wrestling. What giant are you facing right now that it seems unsurmountable, undefeatable, who is dominating you? And you need to step up, get some perspective. And you need God to give you the courage, the conviction, and the confidence to slay that giant. What is it right now? I can tell you, as a church, I can foresee some of the giants. I see them popping their head over the horizon right now. I see it. I see them coming. And they're not just, messing around, picking their nose. They are running full force straight at us. Like these giants are not, big friendly. All right? These aren't BFGs. These are the giants that grind our bones to make their bread type giants. You know what I'm saying? They're coming for us. Are we ready to step up and slay some giants? Do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Do not be afraid of them. When God's people, when God's church comes together in courage, in conviction, and in confidence, do you know what happens? You know what happens? I'll tell you what happens. Giants fall. There's no giant that can step up to this. When we come together and claim the promises of God over our lives in our church, courage, conviction, and confidence, giants fall. Every time. New Dawn, it's time we step up and slay some giants. Don't you think? It's time to slay some giants.